students, we are going to learn how to arrange fractions in order of magnitude. We are going to learn how to arrange fractions from smallest to highest, and also from highest to smallest. That is what we refer to as comparison of fractions. Let's first take fractions that have common denominators. For example, we have four fractions here, all having the same denominator. 1 out of 2, 2 out of 2, 3 out of 2, 4 out of 2. Whenever the fractions have the same denominator, you put the denominator aside and consider only the numerators in the comparison process. So you arrange the fractions based on the magnitude or the size of the numerators. So this has a numerator of 1, numerator of this one is 2, numerator of this one is 3, numerator of this one is 4. So these fractions are already arranged in ascending order of magnitude. They have been already arranged from the smallest to the biggest because they have the same denominator but different numerators. Alright, so we can use the greater than sign to show the order of magnitude of these fractions. 4 out of 2 is greater than 3 out of 2. The same way 3 out of 2 is greater than 2 out of 2. And finally 2 out of 2 is greater than 1 out of 2. So we can also say 1 out of 2 is less than 2 out of 2, while 2 out of 2 is less than 3 out of 2, while 3 out of 2 is less than 4 out of 2. So this is in ascending order of magnitude. Let's take these fractions. We have 5 out of 9, 2 out of 9, 7 out of 9. Let's try and arrange these fractions in ascending order of magnitude. When all the fractions have the same denominator, then there is no problem. You are just going to arrange the fractions in the order of magnitude you want. I want to arrange my fractions in ascending order of magnitude. That is from the smallest to the highest. For this reason, I just need to compare the numerators due to the existence of common denominator. So 2 is the smallest among all the numerators. So 2 out of 9 will be the first fraction. And it is going to be less than the next fraction, which is 5 out of 9. And 5 out of 9 is going to be less than the next fraction, which is 7 out of 9. So because they have the same denominator, I didn't have any problem in arranging them or comparing them. I just compared the numerators and arranged them in the order of magnitude I want. Now let's go to where we don't have common denominators. All the fractions have different denominators. Non-common denominators. When the fractions have different denominators, let's take sample fractions like 2 out of 5, 3 out of 6, and 5 out of, let's say 5 out of 3. When the fractions have different denominators, then we have to make sure that they get the same denominators before we can compare them. Comparison is very easier when all the fractions have the same denominator. For this reason, we have to employ a method known as renaming. In the renaming method, we make sure that all the fractions have the same denominator. That is what we do. So how do we do it? We will pick a factor that will multiply both the numerator and the denominator of each fraction, thereby at the end rendering all the fractions a common denominator. We'll pick a factor for each fraction and multiply both the numerator and the denominator by that factor, making sure that at the end it is going to render all of them the same denominator. So taking 5, 6, and 3, let's find an LCM for them. An LCM for them. 5, 6, and 3, we can say have a common LCM of 30, because we know that 5 will go into 30, 6 will go into 30, and 3 will also go into 30. So the next thing to do is to divide the LCM by each of the denominators to get that factor you need to change the fractions to different equivalent fractions. So dividing 30 by 5, I am going to get 6, meaning that I have to multiply both the numerator and the denominator of 2 out of 5 by 6. Then I take 30 and divide by 6. When I divide 30 by 6, I get 5, meaning that 5 is the common factor by which I have to multiply 3 and 6 to get a denominator of 30. Then I take the same LCM 30 and divide by 3. When I divide this by 3, I'm going to get 10, meaning that I have to multiply this by 10 to get a denominator of 30. Okay, so let's move on. Multiply 2 over 5 by 6, and that is going to give me 12 out of 30. So I have 12 out of 30. Then I move on to multiply 3 out of 6, both numerator and denominator, by 5, and I am going to get 15 out of 30. Then I move on to multiply 5 out of 3 by 10, both denominator and numerator, and that is going to give me 50 out of 30. Now let's write our equivalent fractions. We have the equivalent fractions of 12 out of 30, 15 out of 30, and 50 out of 30. Now we can see that all the fractions have the same denominator. Once they have the same denominator, we don't have any problem again in the comparison process. We only need to compare the numerators. Comparing the numerators, we can see that 12 is less than 15. So it means that 12 out of 30 is less than 15 out of 30. We can also see that 15 is less than 50. So this means that 15 out of 30 is less than 50 out of 30. But remember, the question didn't give us 12 out of 30, 15 out of 30, or 50 out of 30. The question gave us 12, 2 out of 5, 3 out of 6, and 5 out of 3. For this reason, we have to represent each equivalent fraction by the original fraction. So 12 out of 30 represents 2 out of 5. So it is going to be less than 3 out of 6, which is being represented by 15 out of 30. Finally, 5 out of 3 is being represented by 50 out of 30. Therefore, our final answer is this one. Remember, after renaming, you have to represent the equivalent fractions by the original fractions, or else you will not get any mark for the final answer. This is what we call comparison of fractions by renaming. Let's take another set of examples and see how far we go with our renaming method. So here is another set of fractions. let's see how far we go with the renaming method. They have different denominators, so you have to pick a common denominator for all of them. How do you know the common denominator to pick? To pick your common denominator, you have to consider the denominators. Pick out the two biggest denominators and multiply. That will give you your common denominator. We can see that the two biggest denominators here are 5 and 6. So we have to multiply 5 and 6 to get our common denominator. And that is going to be 30. So for this one too, we have our common denominator being 30. What factor should we multiply this fraction with so that we can get the denominator of 30? What about this, that, and that? So we have to take this LCM and divide by each of the denominators here to get our common fraction. So I take 30, divide by 3, that is going to give me 10. It means I have to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 10. Then I come here, the denominator is 2, so I take 30, divide by 2, that is going to give me 15. It means I have to multiply both the numerator and the denominator of this fraction by 15. Then I come to this one. The denominator is 5, so I divide 30 by 5. That is going to give me 6. Then I come to this one, 30 over 6. I'll get 5. So the next thing is to multiply each of these fractions by their common factors here. That is what we call the renaming. You are renaming the fractions. You are giving them different identities, but the same size. The same size. There will be equivalent fraction, but with different names. Okay. So let's see how we go with this. So I take 1 out of 3 and multiply numerator by 10, denominator by 10, and that is going to give me 10 out of 30. So let's take the next fraction, which is 1 out of 2. We know the factor to be 15, so we multiply the numerator by 15, the denominator by 15, so we get 15 out of 30. The next fraction is 3 over 5. We know that the factor for 3 over 5 is 6. So we multiply this by 6 and the denominator by 6. That is going to give us 18 out of 30. Then finally, let's take 34 over 6. The factor is 5. So we multiply 4 by 5 and 6 by 5. That gives us 20 out of 30. So we have renamed our fractions. We have given them different identities. The next thing to do is to arrange them in our order of magnitude. We are going to arrange them in ascending order of magnitude. The fractions are 10 over 30, 15 over 30, 18 over 30, 20 over 30. We can see that among all of them, 10 over 30 is the smallest. So I write 10 over 30 first. And 10 over 30 is going to be less than the next number, which is 15 out of 30. 15 out of 30. And 15 out of 30 is going to be less than the next number, which is 18 out of 30. 18 out of 30. And 18 out of 30 is going to be less than the next number, which is 20 out of 30. Okay? For that matter, we have them. But these are our renamed or our equivalent fractions, not the original fractions. So we have to represent each equivalent fraction by the original fraction, and that is going to give us final answer. So let's take 10 out of 30 is the equivalent fraction for 1 out of 3. So 1 out of 3. 15 out of 30 is the equivalent fraction for 1 out of 2. 1 out of 2. 3 out of 5 was represented by 18 out of 30. So 3 out of 5. Finally, we have 4 out of 6. So our fractions are already in their ascending order of magnitude. So this is what we call the renaming method. If the fractions have different denominators, pick up two larger denominators, multiply to get one number. That is going to be your LCM, or a common denominator for the renamed or the equivalent fractions you are going to produce. After that, divide that LCM by each denominator here to get a factor that will transform the fractions into equivalent fractions. After that, arrange your equivalent fraction in order of magnitude. Then represent each one by the original fraction. When you finish, you are done with your renaming process. This method is very, very simple and easy to go by whenever you are comparing fractions of different denominators. This comes to the end of our lesson for today. Thanks for staying with me. Go over the video, watch it as many times as you can so as to get the concept very well. Apply it in the assignments you have come to pick from the school premises. Until we meet again, take good care of yourself. Stay home and stay safe. Remember, the first step to take in the fight against COVID-19 is your doorstep. Thanks for staying with me. Bye-bye.